We continue our work at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and now give the floor to Mr. Alexander Hook, Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. He will present weekly updates from the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Mr. Hook, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Last week, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine recorded a 40% decrease in the number of ceasefire violations compared to the previous week. If measured in terms of explosion caused by Minsk proscribed weapons such as mortar, tanks, artillery, including multiple launch rocket systems, the decrease of the level of violence was even more pronounced. Last week, the SMM recorded around 110 such explosions compared to 617 the previous week. That's a more than 80% decrease. Dear friends, 110 explosions are obviously too many, especially as many of them are happening in residential areas. And it is the civilian population that therefore continues to pay the price. Last week, the OSCE SMM confirmed 6 civilian casualties, 2 fatalities and 4 injuries. One of those killed was an 81-year-old woman in Yasinovata. She sustained multiple shrapnel wounds, necessitating the amputation of her left arm and leg and eventually causing her death. Another victim was a 19-year-old girl. She was standing outside her home in Pikuzi when she was killed by shrapnel. In Kadivka, a 12-year-old boy was injured, hit by shrapnel as he stood outside his home. Dear friends, the decrease in the level of violence last week came as the sides, as part of the Harvest ceasefire, yet again recommitted to adhere to the ceasefire agreed back in September 2014. I welcome this recommitment, especially if it means less violence and fewer fatalities. I welcome it also as it is a grassroots initiative conceived by local municipalities in southern Donetsk region. The OSCE SMM took the proposal on board, bringing it to the trilateral contact group in Minsk last week. The initiative reflects the deep-seated wish of people to end the violence that continues to destroy their lives and livelihoods. But it has not ended, and it will not end. The basic underlying root causes, the presence of heavy weapons and the proximity of forces and hardware, remains in place. Yet there had been a decrease, but we have noted similar decreases before, which were followed by upsurges in violence. It is part of a pattern that has defined the conflict. Volatility remains, sudden bursts of violence puncture relative silence. In the past 24 hours, this volatility has particularly been evident. Yesterday, in the space of just 3 hours, the SMM monitors in Yasinovata observed approximately 500 explosions. And last night, our monitors in the recently opened forward patrol base in Popasna registered a major engagement. We still only have preliminary data, but I can tell you that the fighting was so intense at one point that it was impossible to count the number of explosions. The events in Yasinovata and Popasna could not have happened if the sides had withdrawn their heavy weapons, as they promised they would. Last week also saw a number of other developments that cast doubt on the sides' commitment to the ceasefire. In addition to the usual restrictions on the SMM's freedom of movement, 17 times in areas not controlled by the government and once in areas controlled by the government, there has also been a number of incidents in which our monitors' lives were endangered. In Yasinovata on Tuesday last week, an armed so-called DPR member shot at our monitors and attacked their vehicle. Later last week, on Friday in Volatility, SMM monitors came under fire with bullets whistling overhead and mortars and grenades fired from a position just 100 meters away. The sites also regularly shoot at SMM's unmanned aerial vehicles, most recently in Satishne on Monday this week. In many ways, all this is typical. Efforts to stop the OSCE SMM from doing our job have long been a feature of this conflict. Those restricting us or attempting to intimidate or threaten us have always sought to prevent us from establishing facts on the ground. Where there have been restrictions and threats, there are clearly uncomfortable truths certain people would prefer us not to expose. Nowhere was this more evident last week than in areas close to the unsecured border with the Russian Federation, in particular in the Novozovsk area of southern Donetsk region. There, since the beginning of the month, armed so-called DPR members have repeatedly prevented us from monitoring. The Joint Center for Control and Coordination, instead of ensuring our access as they are tasked by the Minsk agreements, has instead told us we need written permission from the so-called DPR to access this area. I would like to remind everyone that the OSCE SMM already has written permission to access these areas. It is called the Addendum to the Minsk agreement. Our freedom of movement is also guaranteed by the mission's mandate, which was given to us by the OSCE's 57 participating states, including Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I would also like to remind the so-called DPR that their representative signed the addendum to the Minsk agreement and has, with his signature, agreed that the Joint Center for Control and Coordination should assist in assuring our safety and security in areas currently controlled by the armed formation he leads. Dear friends, obviously, even last week, when there was a reduction in the level of violence, the ceasefire is not holding. Recommitments to the ceasefire, such as we saw last week with the Harvest ceasefire, have at best resulted in partial adherence to the ceasefire, and always only for a very short period of time. There are many reasons for this. Lack of political will, obviously. Poor command and control, perhaps. But what really underpins the violence is fear. Fear of the other side. In the absence of verified objective information, neither side can be sure that the other side has withdrawn or disengaged. So long as the sides continue to restrict the movement of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, so long as they deliberately try to prevent us from monitoring the weapons withdrawal regime and the disengagement process, neither side has and will have the confidence that the other side has complied with their commitments. Recommitting to the ceasefire is welcome, and any reduction in the level of violence, even for a short period of time, is welcome. But it is not the answer. It will not resolve the conflict, because recommitment in itself is not enough. Without full compliance, without the withdrawal of heavy weapons, without disengagement of forces and hardware, recommitment is largely an empty gesture. If the sides' recommitment to the ceasefire is to be more than just words, then they need first to stop shooting at our monitors and unmanned aerial vehicles. Next steps, withdrawal, disengagement, demining, can then follow. Steps on a path to peace. Dear friends, as usual at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 651 monitors, of whom 569 are deployed to the east. In addition, there are 350 Ukrainian colleagues and 90 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions? Шановні колеги, чи є запитання? The question will be in Ukrainian.
Crimean News. Based on your statement and based on the SMM daily reports, the patrolling work is quite dangerous recently. I'm referring to unarmed civilian monitors. Due to this high level of threats against the monitors, so whether you had any cases where monitors refused to work at the mission, resigned just because of this deteriorating situation in Donbass. Thank you.
Thank you. I first have to emphasize that the situation had been difficult throughout the first half of this year. We had now, since April, at least 2 serious incidents on a week. That doesn't include regular restrictions in freedom of movement, but these are instances when our patrols are shot at, or when weapons are being fired in close proximity, or when our assets are being targeted. That was, at the beginning of the year, still at 1 such serious incident a week, so a doubling of those incidents. We have also seen, of course, that the restrictions they are imposing on us will prevent us from seeing the reality on the ground, and that, as I have here said many times, there can only be one reason for these restrictions and these intimidations that we are subjected to, which is to prevent us from monitoring the truth and from preventing us from reporting the truth. And these uncomfortable truths that we are prevented from reporting are the reasons why these restrictions are imposed on us. Now, the monitors, of course, that live and work in this environment have a very difficult time, and it is up to each monitor to decide whether or not he or she will continue. We have had not a noticeable decrease in numbers, as you know. Since that serious incident at the 23rd of April, the number of 650 monitors on average has remained since then in place. The impacts of that incident, of course, however, are serious, and mission members every day are facing these challenges with great energy. And I have just been out there last week, and I can assure you that the vast majority of our monitors remains committed to do the job. And it has also been said here once again that the mission is fulfilling its part of the contribution to find a peaceful solution. It's about time that the sides make their contribution to it. We implement our mandate. The sides have yet failed to fully implement their agreement they have signed in 2014 and subsequent agreements thereon. Thank you.
One more question. In your reports, you had it several times that the monitors for security concerns had no access to their camera in the so-called DPR-controlled Petrivsk. Can you shed some light on the situation in Petrivsk and with your camera?
That the sites have not enabled us to access this camera safely. It is up to those in effective control to ensure that access, and once that is granted to us, as it is foreseen in the Minsk agreements, we would be able to access these cameras, and that is, however, not in our hands, it's in the hands of those who exercise control there at the moment.
Does it mean that the camera is not operation and you get no information from the camera? Does it mean that the camera in Petrivsk is not operational and you do not retrieve the information from this camera?
I can confirm during the times when those that our ineffective control in the area do not permit us access to the camera or facilitate safe access, we are unable to make use of the camera.
Igor Filipenko, news agency Nation. You said that the sites are actually imposing the restriction and shooting at the monitors and UAVs. That means that also in the government-controlled areas, somebody is shooting at your unmanned aerial vehicles. Do you know the reasons why they are shooting?
Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that UAVs had been shot at while flying over government-controlled areas. We expect that the Joint Center for Control and Coordination undertakes all measures to hold those to account who have either committed this or ordered this violation of the Minsk Agreement and our mandate. We know that Ukrainian armed forces do undertake, in some cases, investigations into these incidents, and we would be more than willing to report on any tangible outcome of these investigations.
Колеги, чи є ще запитання? Якщо запитань більше немає, дякуємо вам.
Thank you.